turn of the century, atmospheric drum and bass was hallmarked by two-step beats being enveloped in rich beds of atmospherics. Complex layers of movement and ear candy helped build a wall of sound that I personally don't hear too much anymore. It's not for everyone, but I love that sound. Let's take a look at a few songs from the era, and then I'll show you how to create something similar. Now, within the framework of layering up your atmospherics, it's important to start with a good bass sound. And in this context, I don't mean a literal bass or the drums. I mean the core sound, and that's going to typically be a pad. And so I have this sample from my Korg Triton here thrown in a sampler. Really nice, smooth, airy pad there. And you can see we're kind of holding out a sweep through the pad and then repeating it in this 8-bar phrase. And so that bass sound, finding that is creating the initial bed for your atmosphere. And then we can start to build on top of that. Now, from that bass sound, depending on things like frequency, pitch, amount of movement in it, you can start to put things on top of it and think about sounds that can interact well with that bass. And so I'm already thinking some type of motion-based sound. So a sound with a good bit of movement within it. And so I have this sample from a Korg Triton. It's actually the same sound as this bass pad, but I just have it playing a single note. And so what I'm doing is stacking the two up. You can hear it's very subtle, and because it's the same sound, it kind of almost snaps in place and fits in like a Lego with that bass pad. So I'm playing the original root note. And then I have another variant here where I'm playing it pitched down on C3. And so what we're doing is we can play this same note with the pad on its original key. And you heard how they kind of melt together. And you hear that flyby note kind of poking out. But if we then pitch it one way or the other, it creates this almost like dissonance and separation. So we have these two here. It sounds cohesive. And then the second note here kind of pulls us out of that and creates some variation. Now, the next thing I did was brought in this little shimmery sound here. So if we stack that up, and you can hear with that, we get those little bleeps and burbles kind of at the top. Then we come in, and I wanted to add a little bit of bass and thickness to this sound. So I sampled this from my Korg Triton. And so I sampled a progression there directly, and then I just triggered it through the sampler, and this just adds some thickness to our sound. But you'll hear around 5 bars, that note actually shifts down as well. So it's similar to these two flyby notes, just thickening up that sound and giving us a little more bass. And then what I did is at the end of my phrase, I added this sound. Right, very wispy single note sound and everything together. If I just start from the 5th bar. And then I came on down at the bottom here and added another kind of effects-like sound. Just additional wispiness to stack with everything. So this is everything together. Now, something really important to call out here is you'll notice we're not just drawing out 8-bar loops of holding sustained notes. You know, for all these different sounds, they're coming in at different pieces of the arrangement to try to keep like this cohesive element that has room to breathe. And so, you know, we have this flyby note plays for 4 bars and then it lets off. Then we have flyby 2 come in on the second phrase of this 8-bar loop here. And I try to think of like this push, pull, almost call and response, like a lot of people look at with, you know, bass and drums, but with our pad sounds. And so, you know, a lot of these sweepy atmospheric pads, the way the sound evolves, whether it be through a filter sweep or an amp envelope going up, you know, going down and sustaining, it's creating little pockets of silence in the song where you can put other things in to fill the gaps, if that makes any sense, right? So this process, right, you want your arrangement to kind of look like this, where you have things starting and stopping at different points, almost like that call and response piece. And the perfect example is this note on this track here. You'll hear like as some of these other notes reach their peak in volume and movement and they start to fade out, this note starts to gradually come in a little bit before they fade out. So it creates like this smooth, crossfadey, like push-pull breathing response. So just focus on this last one here. Right? So that like low note here, it shifts. It's playing a single note. Second half of the phrase, it shifts down. And as it's beginning to fade out, right, we get another like wash from that other sound. And so everything sounds smooth, cohesive. We're taking advantage of peaks and valleys in the entire bed of sounds to create this smooth, cohesive bed of atmospherics. Another important thing here is effects, and I think a lot of people get scared to use a lot of effects. I think traditional production technique says be very liberal with your effects. But I think for this genre of music, you should do the opposite, in that all of these tracks here are being sent to a massive delay here. So I have a send with a nice fat delay. All of these are feeding into that pretty heavily. And so all of our effects, well, they're sharing the same space, right? They're going through a singular effect unit, and we are really drenching that, and it helps so much with the atmosphere. So I'm going to mute the effects send and then slowly bring it up. Right? It's so important for that big atmospheric sound. Do not be scared to use effects and break some rules when you're making these types of tracks. The final piece of advice or something to think about is a lot of people will approach layering from an engineering perspective, right? They'll think about EQing and frequency ranges and getting things to fit perfectly in and side chaining this and all that. And to a degree, there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can make a very muddy mix by layering up like this, but my core point here is focus less on the engineering and focus more on the sound. Use your ears. Don't overanalyze every track and have 50 spectrum meters open as you try to side chain and EQ and compress things. Keep it simple. Use your ears. If it sounds good, it's likely good, and you can always come back later and kind of remix things. Just get the idea out there, try things, and have fun. And so once you have all your layers built up, you can then drop in your drums and you have an atmospheric drum and bass song.